Hello, I'm Ryan Koch, and this is Civic Tech Chat, a show that looks at the way technology, politics, and policy impacts the world around us. The tools we use, the way services are delivered, and how we talk about and set policy all shape our society. We'll gather around and have a chat about these things together and more. Before we get started, I do want to let you all know that we've started a Discord for the podcast. There will be a link with an invite down in the episode description. Do feel free to go check that out. It's a small community right now, but hoping to grow it. It's a great way to reach out to me and let me know things that you might want us to cover, or to just hang out and talk about civic tech. Welcome back to Civic Tech Chat. This time we're diving deep into something many of us interact with every day, perhaps without even consciously thinking about its design or impact. The infinite scroll. You know the experience. You're on your favorite social media app, news site, or maybe a store, and you scroll down towards that bottom of the page, and suddenly more content starts appearing. You didn't click next, there were no page numbers, just more stuff. That seamless, endless stream of information is the work of infinite scrolling. For this breakdown, we're looking at what this design pattern is, why it was created, how it affects us, the user experience's highs and lows, accessibility concerns, and growing ethical concerns around its use. But what is infinite scrolling? At its core, it's a web design technique where content loads continuously as the user scrolls down the page, eliminating traditional pagination, those page numbers or next buttons that we used to click. It's sometimes also called endless scrolling or continuous scrolling. The original goal, often attributed to designer Asa Raskin, was about user convenience, removing what was seen as unnecessary clicks that would make the browser experience smoother and keep users focused on the content that they're trying to consume. Later on, that same designer would express regret over its use, perhaps for reasons we'll discuss as we go along here. Its use really took off with the rise of social media giants like Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. These platforms needed a way to present their massive, constantly updating feeds of stuff folks were making and sharing, and infinite scroll seemed like a perfect fit. Since then, it's spread all over the place, even to e-commerce sites showing vast product catalogs, news sites trying to keep readers engaged, and many others. It feels particularly natural to use it on mobile devices, where flicking your thumb seems like second nature. The success on major platforms has potentially set a trend, influencing designers across the web with the tools they are working on. But why is it often so hard for folks to stop scrolling? There's maybe some potentially compelling psychology at play. Some researchers suggest that infinite scroll taps into our brain's reward system. Each time new, potentially interesting content appears, it can trigger a small release of dopamine, the neurotransmitter linked to pleasure and reward. This might create a reinforcing loop. Scroll, get a bit of novelty, feel that sense of gratification, and then you desire to do it again. Some have compared this mechanism to other compulsive behaviors like gambling, where you're pulling the lever, or in this case scrolling, hoping for a new reward. When platforms add personalized algorithms showing you exactly what you like, the effect of this sort of compulsion can be stronger. Some also theorize that the Zeigarnik effect, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, which states that unfinished tasks are potentially more memorable, could also contribute to the difficulty of disengaging from infinite scrolling. Because there's no clear endpoint to what you're doing, the user may feel that subtle sense of incompleteness, encouraging continued engagement. However, I should be clear with all of this that more research would be needed to confirm a causal link. This is more correlative or hypothesis that I'm talking about. A third thing is on social media, it can also amplify the fear of missing out, or FOMO, if we're to reach back for colloquial terms of yore. The constant stream of updates creates a sense of urgency, compelling us to keep scrolling to make sure we're not missing important news, trends, or social interactions. From a platform's perspective, a major goal of infinite scroll is often to increase user engagement, keeping people on the site longer. By removing natural stopping points of pagination, users can passively consume content for longer periods, at least in theory. It creates that sense of momentum. And for platforms relying on ad revenue or maximizing attention, this extended engagement is a key metric. It's their key incentive. It can also facilitate serendipitous discovery, stumbling upon interesting content you weren't specifically looking for. Over time, many of us maybe have simply just gotten used to the endless feed style in the applications we use. However, there's the potential for significant downsides. The design can lead to mindless styles of scrolling, where you browse for long periods without a clear goal. Sometimes maybe you don't even realize how much time you've been at the activity. Users have reported feeling stuck in a loop, scrolling without real satisfaction. The sheer volume of information can also cause a bit of cognitive overload, making it hard to process or remember what we even looked at during that time. Increased exposure doesn't always mean meaningful engagement. The normalization of continuous consumption may blur the line between intentional browsing and just filling the time habitually. Infinite scroll is often praised for feeling seamless, especially on mobile devices. It reduces the perceived friction of clicking buttons, and by loading content progressively, it can make the initial page load feel faster. That last bit might sound a bit like a lazy loading concept that the developers out there might be familiar with. But this quest for that seamlessness can also introduce frustration. Users have reported a feeling of loss of control and disorientation. It's easy to lose your place in a big stream that never ends. Without page numbers or an accurate scroll bar, judging progress or how much content left is arduous. Trying to find something you saw earlier is potentially nigh impossible. I would wish you luck scrolling through potentially hundreds of items to find that link you just remembered was particularly interesting 20 minutes ago. Then there are functional issues. What if you want to go to the website's footer, where there's critical links like contact us or privacy policy? Surely we all read that. Those things live there and can be nigh impossible to get to if new content is constantly generating as you scroll down to it. The browser's back button maybe won't work as expected in some cases. Maybe when you click it, it returns you, instead of to your previous spot, dumps you back to the top of the page, kind of putting you back at the beginning of that long scroll journey. It's also difficult to bookmark or share a link that has, a particular place in a scroll, because those kinds of links can be unreliable unless you're able to get into the particular content item and share it directly. And depending on how this is implemented, loading all that content can actually lead to performance issues despite the gains of doing something like lazy loading. As more and more content's generated, it can slow down your browser or device depending on how things like memory are handled. And if you've got slow connections, depending on how much it's trying to load when you get to the bottom, that can go slowly as well. For users that are used to a more traditional web structure, infinite scroll can also disrupt their mental model of how the web should work. Perhaps the most critical civic tech concern with all of this is inaccessibility. This pattern can create significant barriers for users with disabilities, potentially violating Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG, if steps aren't taken to implement the feature in a way that follows those guidelines. Considering keyboard-only users, they might struggle to reach newly loaded content if the focus doesn't shift automatically. And accessing the footer, as we mentioned before, can be quite difficult. Tabbing along those items as we go along might not even trigger new content to load. Screen reader users also face challenges. The constant loading disrupts the reading flow, potentially making it hard to understand the page structure or find specific sections. A common shortcut to jump to the end of the page might also fail. Users of speech recognition software might not be able to trigger content loading with voice commands. People with motor implants could accidentally load more content while trying to interact with an item. Low vision users relying on screen magnifiers can make it incredibly difficult to track content as the page keeps changing. And for users with cognitive abilities or attention disorders, the endless stream without clear breaks could potentially feel overwhelming, kind of feel like overload. There are some technical solutions like the ARIA role equals feed that exist to help with things like screen reader navigation. They don't solve all the problems we've talked about, but things like that can solve some of them and be highly useful for technology users. Accessibility often requires a bit more than just a basic infinite scroll implementation. So if infinite scroll has many issues, what alternatives do we have? Traditional pagination is still a strong contender. It offers you structure, control, maybe even potentially better search engine optimization, depending on your use case. A simple load more button provides a middle ground, giving users control over content while keeping the footer accessible. It gives them that moment to decide, I would like to see more. Hybrid approaches combining scrolling with occasional page markers or load more prompts are also possible. The best choice depends really heavily on the context and what the user goals are for the web service or application. If infinite scroll is used, designers are relied upon to implement solid practices to mitigate downsides. Those kinds of things can include clear loading indicators, ways to bookmark or share specific items, performance optimization like the lazy loading technique we talked about, maybe a button that takes you back to the top, making sure you're using things like proper ARIA rules and using structures that are friendly for keyboard navigation, ensuring the footer is easily accessible even with infinite scrolling, and clearly indicating when the end of the content is reached. In short, implementing infinite scroll responsibly takes some effort. Let's switch over to the ethical dimension of this conversation. Concerns are growing about design patterns that exploit psychological vulnerabilities to maximize engagement. Links have been drawn between excessive scrolling and negative mental health impacts like anxiety and stress, sleep disruption, attention deficits, and even physical strain. Critics also point to the sheer amount of time potentially wasted in scrolling loops. This has sparked debate about regulation. The European Parliament has raised concerns, and proposals like the SMART Act in the United States have targeted features like infinite scroll, citing risks, especially to younger users. The argument for regulation often centers on protecting users from potential harm, and proposals like the SMART Act, for example, have sparked a lot of conversation, though I must say that action on them doesn't yet appear imminent to be happening. So I don't want to give you the idea that there's some sort of proposal that's going to be voted on soon and put into place. Conversely, arguments that are against regulations, like we've mentioned, emphasize individual responsibility and warn against stifling innovation or limiting user choice. Some suggest focusing on platform responsibility, providing users tools to manage their own usage, like time limits or usage stats. Browser extensions and third-party tools are also emerging to give users greater control. Infinite scrolling is a powerful technique, but potentially a double-edged sword. It offers apparent seamlessness and boosts engagement, but comes with significant costs to user experience, mental well-being, and potentially accessibility. The right choice isn't always clear and depends heavily on your context. As designers, developers, and users of technology, we need to be mindful of the trade-offs. Prioritizing user-centered design and considering the ethical implications is crucial. We need to find a balance between engagement and well-being. So what can we do? First, you can simply be aware. Notice when you're caught in an infinite scroll yourself. Ask yourself if the experience is serving you or acting as a frustration point. Are you finding what you need or just allowing time to pass? You can also explore tools. You can look into browser settings, app features, or third-party extensions that might help you manage your own scrolling habits, or even disable infinite scroll on certain websites. Third, consider accessibility. When you encounter infinite scroll, whether through your use or through your work, think about how someone using assistive technology might navigate it. Does it seem like care is being taken in what you're building or in what you're using to make it usable for everyone? And finally, engage in conversation. Talk about these design patterns. The more aware we are collectively and within our teams that we work with every day, the more pressure we can put to make sure that things are done in a responsible, ethical, and accessible way. Our digital environment is shaped by countless design decisions, whether we're talking about the products we're working on, if we're the designers and developers of the world, or the products we use out there as we navigate our own life and experiences. Understanding patterns like infinite scrolling empowers us to be critical consumers as well as advocates in our work and our daily life for a better, more inclusive digital public square. And that covers it for this episode of Civic Tech Chat. Join us next time as we continue exploring this intersection of technology and the public interest. I'll catch you next time.
Visit us on the web at civictech.chat or subscribe to us for content updates wherever it is you download your podcasts.